In fact, they burn the same number of calories as Americans do and Europeans do.
Hmm.
And in fact, by the way, if you don't account for body size, they burn less than Americans do. Why? Because they tend to be a bit shorter, a bit smaller bodied.
I
And
see.
so, yeah, so people say, well, did you account for body size? And we say, I always laugh a little bit because I'm like, well, yeah, if we don't account for body size, it's even crazier.
Right, right, right.
But if you account for body size, they're burning the same number of calories as we'd expect for, an adult in the US. That was mind blowing because they're much more active. They get more physical activity in a
Yeah,
day
yeah,
than most Americans get in a week. So we didn't expect that at all. And that was the beginning for me. Other people had sort of seen pieces of this, but this is for me, that was the beginning of the aha. Our bodies somehow adjust to our lifestyles.
right, right.
And even when we're physically active, we're not burning as many calories as you'd expect for that increased activity. Maybe there's something going on there. And so that became, the last 10 or 15 years of my work is trying to,
Yeah,
part of it has been trying to understand that.
yeah. And so I mean, let's unpack that for people. So some populations are way more active. The Hadza are, in fact, as
Yeah.
you would expect, more active than sedentary, Western Europeans or Americans today, and yet they're not burning as many more calories as you'd expect for that difference in active activity.
Yeah.
So, what's making up for the difference here? Is it an adaptation in the basal metabolic rate? What's going on?
We've been trying to figure this out for a long time. And it's challenging because um, measuring these kind of trade-offs is hard to do inherently. We think that some aspects of resting metabolic rate are being reduced. So if we look at the best data we have comparing active and inactive people with the best quality data isn't necessarily the Hadza versus everybody else because when we go to the Hadza, we do that work in the field. We're limited in the tools that we can bring with us in the back
Mm-hmm.
of a Land Rover into the middle of savannah.
Mm-hmm.
So the best data often comes from comparisons of physically active people who exercise a lot and people who are more sedentary. When you look at those comparisons, we see, in some cases, we see lower basal metabolic rates, although we don't always see that, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we see lower basal metabolic rates. So that's a clue.
In
We
active,
see
more active people.
inactive people.
Yeah.
Yep. We see lower levels of immune function. So we see like inflammation gets tamped down.
Mm-hmm.
We see stress reactivity, the kind of alertness
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
you get when you are stressed, even good stress
Yes,
goes
but
down.
what's important there, I think, what you said, a lower immune function. The immune system is very expensive metabolically, so
Yeah.
that's a place where we could be making up for that difference.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
exactly right. So, and what the biggest things we see are changes in background inflammation, which you kind of don't,
Mm.
that's usually a bad thing to have chronically high,
Right, right, right.
inflammation levels. So that gets tamped down when you exercise. Stress reactivity, the cortisol and epinephrine response that you get to stress goes down when you exercise. Well, those are
Hmm.
also metabolically expensive responses. You get less of that.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, we know that people who produce more cortisol and epinephrine per day burn more energy per day than people who don't
Hmm.
for basal metabolic rates. So that is really one place that we could absolutely be saving energy that way. Um, the reproductive hormones are also lower in people who exercise more. That's a surprise to some people because they think, that there's a certain corner of the internet that's sure that if you go out and lift weights, you're going to increase your testosterone levels. Uh, that's can happen in the short term as you anabolically build muscle. But actually, if people exercise a lot, um, testosterone levels, estrogen levels tend to go down, not up, because your body's kind of adjusting to that limited energy availability and tamping those processes down. So all of that is healthy, by the way. Reduce stress, reduce,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's all good until you go to the extreme. If you are like Olympic level, distance
Yeah.
runner, then your exercise workload might be so big that you actually tamp those processes down too
Right,
far
right.
and you get overtraining syndrome.
Yep. And that's where people have like hormone problems and other things that start to
Yep,
go awry.
exactly, exactly. So in my mind, I think before this perspective on metabolism kind of became more common, I think those responses in overtraining syndrome were seen as like a pathology that's like a binary, you're fine and then you're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, well, it is true that that's not a healthy way to live, but it's just the end of the spectrum
Mhm.
of how you spend your calories.
I see. So if I try and abstract some, a theme from this that I'm hearing, tell
Yeah.
me what you think about this. It kind of sounds like if you exercise, the more you exercise up to a point, if you're doing a healthy amount
Yeah.
of exercise, it is decreasing the extent to which your body is doing metabolically expensive things at baseline, like chronic inflammation related to immune system activity. And therefore, because you're not putting as much energy into those energy sinks, you have more energy left over that can be used for more useful things. And that might play into why you've got a lower body fat percentage, say.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily decrease your body fat percentage because if the total calories burned per day don't change, then you're not going to burn excess body fat off. And in fact, when we look at people who are more active and less active, we don't see a body fat relationship there, not strongly.
Hmm.
Um, the if you are more active today and you maintain that for the next few years, you're no more or less likely to gain body fat as anybody
Hmm.
else,
Hmm.
for example.
I see. So the energy that you're not putting into things like, the immune system stuff and, other stress responses and things like that, it's not necessarily just going to burn fat off, but it's going to be left over to do something else.
Well, part of it's the exercise, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like if I burn my calories in my muscles because I exercise,
Yeah.
then I have less energy to burn in my immune system and everything else,
Right. Right.
right?